Hi, my name is Reese Basimio, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Outer Circle Inner Stillness. Today's episode was a really fun one, really interesting, worthy of a couple notes. Here we get to talk about internal family systems and the parts, and we get to talk about parenting dynamics and how that works. And we also get to talk about psychedelics. I get to interview a wonderful counselor healer who is familiar and well versed in the world of psychedelic assisted therapy. So a couple notes around this episode. One is a technical one. So it's from the archives. It was recorded in the early days of the podcast when I did not yet have all of the technology figured out. So the platform we used to record the video wasn't the highest quality. Forgive me. The dubbing is a bit off, but the audio should be good. So I think then that it is still worth taking in, even if you turn the screen off or something. And other ones will get better. And a content note. So talking about psychedelics, what's the place that psychedelics have in a spiritual context or in a sobriety context? They're controversial and potentially kind of risky. And certainly as an Orthodox person, and within Orthodox Christianity, we do have some very strong reservations around things that open up the mind, especially in an unregulated sort of way. And definitely, as an Orthodox person, I personally do not use psychedelics and won't personally condone that for further Orthodox people, just because there is an opening of the mind, and we do exercise a great deal of caution around that. Nevertheless, and also in a sobriety context, it's a drug, isn't it? Right. So we do have to be careful and wise with these things. Nevertheless, I did find it useful to have this conversation, for one, to humanize the other side. Even if we might look at those people using psychedelics as like those people and be kind of scared, they're human. They're doing their best. They have a lot of perspective to offer. And the man I get to interview today, he's really, really gentle, really wise, has a lot of wise perspectives. And so it is important to humanize those even with whom we disagree, maybe very strongly. And secondly, too, the Hart Dasteel, the practitioner that I get to interview, he talks at length around what psychedelics are, and he incorporates them into his practice, and so he has a lot of buy-in into that. But he also talks about the cautions around them, and is very open about here's some of the risks involved, here's some of the considerations, here's who should not do them, here's also what is required if you're going to do them. It's necessary to have a really good integration practice afterwards. So not at all just a casual thing to do. There's a particular procedure for it, and he talks at length about that. And I feel like that is an important component to promote as well. If you are considering using psychedelics, there's an avenue for that. Here's these cautions, and you got to listen to them. So that's our episode. The full episode will be available on the Patreon for patrons only, and portions of the episode will also be made open to the public via YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And thank you for listening and supporting the show. And I hope this I hope this interview is helpful, or at very least thought-provoking. Welcome to the Outer Circle Inner Stillness, conversations, reflections on the spiritual life and the sobriety work and where they come together. And here we explore what is the sober way of life, because it's not just a program or a quick fix. It tends to be a little bit more like conversion, because you tend to transform your whole life. So that's what we're talking about here. Anyway, I'm Reese Basimio. I'm here with Hart Dasteel. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I've been excited to connect over this in this way with you. So
I love just hearing you in the introduction. It's an interesting thing to bring a psychedelic integration coach onto a podcast about healing and sobriety, trauma and addiction, and how psychedelics as a substance can interplay. So that it should be an interesting conversation.
I think so. Yes. So speaking of which, so for those who haven't run into you at a riverbank. um, uh, would you say a little bit about who you are? What's your corner of the healing world? What's your relationship to addiction recovery or spirituality and other important parts about you?
Yeah, yeah. So I am a trauma-informed psychedelic integration coach with internal family systems primarily as my modality for therapeutically supporting people in the process of preparing for their journeys and integrating their journeys. So I've got all of that going on. I'm also a very busy dad, and so I've got two little ones at home. I know you've got a few kids as well, and so yeah, when I'm not supporting my clients and doing that work, or kind of focusing on my own healing journey and with the kids and helping parents and all the rest. So it's a beautiful, busy, and oftentimes chaotic life, as you know how it is. And I'm just coming off a little bit of that chaos right now. So just sending that off and arriving more. Yeah.
Yeah. I do know that tension. On the one hand, part of me feels like I get to like take a break from my family by coming to work, which is its own odd sort of chaos. But then there's this other part of me that's like, oh, I have to work so much. All I want to do is be back with my family, and it's this
Hmm.
very, very complex tension.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
such a dance. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and we've been talking about these polarizations and internal family systems, which in essence, for those that don't know much about IFS, Dick Schwartz or Richard Schwartz, he created this model over many, many years. And the basic idea is that we're not just these mono mind beings. We don't have one mind. And that's like kind of the old paradigm and the old model. And the deeper and more true, I believe, understanding is that we are um, uh, a plethora of parts, and there's three primary parts of our mind and our being. And there's exiles, which are like the wounded child, the inner child that's hurt and holding on to pain and is harboring that and carrying that burden. And so we push them down. And so we have these managers that keep them at bay, keep them repressed and pushed down. And those managers oftentimes occupy our identity most of the time, the way we think and the way we feel, and essentially our defenses. And then we have these firefighters as well, and those are the guys that like to, sneak out and react to an exile being triggered and coming to the surface. So they're oftentimes the ones that are turning impulsively to substances. The addiction has this underlying cause of trauma through the exile, and then the firefighter that immediately reacts to put out the fire of that pain. So then we turn to, you know, whatever it might be, some kind of substance, some kind of gaming or escapism in some form. So yeah, so we have these polarizations, and I find it even within myself, polarizations of I want to be with my kids. I have so much fun with them. And then there's just a point where it's like, wow, I am extremely overstimulated right now and I need to downregulate, and work can be that oftentimes. So I get it.
yeah. The polarizations, they're like the classic puzzle of what is addiction, or the maddening mystery of the addictions world. That it's like I know I'm going to completely destroy my life if I go out unused one more time, and yet I
Right.
still do it. Why do I do
Mhm.
this? Yeah, and that the war of the overreactive firefighter part in tension with this maybe really critical, maybe really rigid, maybe really shaming manager part over how do we protect what we believe is a self from this exile that we think is going to be so overwhelming, but probably just needs a big hug. Yeah, it's been really interesting for me doing men's groups over this, and um, as I'm trying to offer the guys a lot of language for the inner world, different parts, really encountering in really profound ways that just how terrifying it can be to enter one system, especially if one has not ever done it before, or if one has used cannabis or pornography or whatever the thing for so long as this chemical shield, and then now having to now taking that away. Some of the guys who succeeded that initially, their then response is to just be like really numb or really shut down or really disconnected from their body. And I
Mhm.
would say that, so probably not yet in a place of true sobriety, more in like a managerial, I'm like managing my emotions sort of role.
Mm.
And yeah, so then a lot of the work becomes trying to help them connect first to these protective managers, and then finally eventually to the inner child within.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say has drawn you to this sort of approach to addictions recovery, as opposed to, say, more classic like CBT oriented, behavioral, you know, get clean or else you're in jail sort of approach?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, I don't have like a niche focus in my practice with addiction recovery, but I have worked with many people through addiction and worked through my own addictive parts. And that's an ongoing process, of course. So I haven't completed such a thing. And that's what I love about this. In IFS, it's an ongoing relationship. It's not like you do something with these parts and you resolve it and then it's done. There is the unburdening, which is the releasing of that pain and that weight, and that's an amazing trauma healing when that happens. But we have to stay in relationship with these parts for the rest of our lives. We get to, it's a beautiful privilege to like re-earn the trust of our inner child. So with that, for the folks that I have supported in addiction recovery, I have found that there is always going to be these managerial parts that are really terrified of getting in touch with the exile's pain. And I see a lot of people trying to do this on their own. And there's something so important about having another nervous system and having another person there to help them co-regulate and to be with those parts and to embody what's called the self. We haven't talked too much about self, but self being kind of that spiritual essence of the person that can hold the feelings or the vibration, you could call it, of compassion and care and curiosity and courage and qualities like that. So yeah, it feels like people who are really lost in addiction are really looking for these qualities, looking for that way of being. Especially those who may be addicted to opiates and substances like that. And they describe so many that it's like receiving this warm hug, and they want that hug again and again and again. And the beauty of actually turning towards one system and going into the healing process is that eventually most of my clients end up hugging their inner child and providing that resource of love and nurturance and safety for the child. And then they feel that hug, the same hug that they were, kind of seeking out with the drug, they're able to find internally. But it can be really hard to find the self energy, being the adult that can hug the kid when we're stuck and lost unconsciously as the kid. And that's where having a practitioner outside of us can really help.
Yeah, because the practitioner can sort of buddy breathe the self energy until the person is able to access their own and become their own internal hug.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think sometimes people will talk about like co-regulation as kind of a jargony term for that.
Yeah.
So me now in this world and having done this and seen this, I'm completely on board, very all about that image of helping this person find their inner child, even up into like 40s, 50s, 60s, these, kind of like, grizzled old men, like, connecting with like their inner boy and just, being really like learning to be really tender and gentle with them. I mean, I work mostly with men, so it's that way, but yeah, it's super beautiful. I would wonder, what's your thought on, I'm going to ask the, what's the point question. Context being, I mean, life is really difficult. I mean, the world's super chaotic with, laundry list of things that we might feel concerned about out on the world system, politics, climate, environment, people, violence, drugs, all of that. And life's really hard. I mean, we go through a lot of difficulties. We see a lot of people go through worse difficulties, especially, here we are in a healing profession, and we tend to run up against like these really, really bad things, these bad scenarios. We brush up against like the extra dark of life. I would wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I think this sort of work is really maybe even more essential in the midst of all the chaos and the darkness. But sometimes I'm finding that articulating why is a little bit tricky. I'm still trying to learn that. What are your thoughts on if the outside world is so bad and such that it is? What is the point of investing in your inner world?
That's a really great question. If the outside world is so chaotic and painful, what's the point or what's the benefit of going internally and doing that? I love the saying, as above, so below, as within, so without, that there is this resonant field that we're in, and so you could go in the quantum field of conversation or jargon, you can go into the shamanic. They're actually not separate or different. It's just that shamanism has particular tools of working with the quantum field, whereas quantum physics is maybe more so utilizing material technology to explore the non-material in a sense. But a lot of what shamanism points to is that the outer world is a co-creation of what's happening inside. And of course, in some sense, that's obvious, right? Like if I'm in pain, if I'm hurt, then I'm more likely to perpetuate pain because that's the place that I'm coming from. That's the resonance that I'm in. And so if we're in pain, if we're hurting, which most people are, almost all of us are holding not just the traumas of this lifetime, but also the traumas of the past, give or take, at least on a scientific level. We know 7 generations is epigenetically streamed down through our DNA into ours from both sides, and how that branches out. That's a lot of really wounded ancestors. We're talking war, we're talking, huge migrations where, lots of people die depending on ancestors from Europe or from different parts of the world, Africa, Asia. There's so much painful history to this human story. And so like, how can we be with the external world? I think the more internally resourced we are by doing our healing work, and we're not carrying as much pain and as much blame and shame and guilt and anger and rage, and we really master those states, because we need the parts that generate those emotions, right? They're an intrinsic part of our wholeness. So that's something I like to tell clients when we first start with IFS is we're not trying to get rid of your parts. In fact, that's exactly why you're in so much suffering, because you're trying to get rid of parts of yourself that are currently doing things that are not helpful, whether it's abuse or a drug addiction or things like that. Those parts actually hold the key to so much more of life, so much more experience to be had in joy, and going from being a protector part that's just looking for the easy out to being like a guardian and a sacred protector as a guardian. So I see that happen a lot. And then we can go out into the world and we can be like, yeah, this is really painful. This sucks. I'm seeing people on the streets. I'm witnessing all of these different marginalized communities that don't have any access in the ways that they need. How can they thrive? There's so much out there. And but if we're constantly getting triggered about it and we're not able to show up to meet it, and to bring through an open heart, then we're not helping necessarily.
Wow, there's so much there. I really appreciate all of your thoughts there. I mean, picking out a couple components. I'm really hanging on this phrase you use, like this idea, like becoming internally resourced people. And it was that other cliche, physician, heal thyself.
Right.
The idea, if I'm not well, or if I'm really broken, or if I'm really burdened, how much help am I going to be really out in the world? And there's a quote from a great saint within my tradition that I've said a bunch on the podcast here before, and it's kind of like he's like kind of like the patron saint of the podcast. But Saint Seraphim of Sarov, he would say, acquire the inner stillness, and 1,000 around you will be saved. And in this understanding, it's very much this idea of I have been healed. I have been healed by encountering the risen Christ within, or
Yeah.
I have found my own inner peace. And so in that way, because I'm different in some inexplicable way, that does impact the world around us. And I really appreciate you bringing in this very intergenerational component of things. Talked about genetics, epigenetics. I'm thinking like intergenerational trauma as an expression of that. And there's a way I think that healing is the long game. And that I'm wondering if maybe that's a point of frustration for some people, is saying, here's all of these difficulties right now. How do I fix everything right now or quickly? Or how do I fix like the whole thing all at once or something? Or can I change a system to make everything better? And it could be that the more functional, realistic, longer lasting approach to healing is actually very much like the long game, more this
Mhm.
seed
Yeah.
idea of each person who becomes a little healthier becomes a 7 generation seed.
It's really because you're talking about the system, like does something outside need to change? And I just like I'm so grateful for the people that have their feet on the ground doing the things that seem very necessary to change the structure and the system. And at the same time, if those people who are attempting to change something externally are still functioning within a similar paradigm and wavelength that started the problem in the first place, then it might not actually produce the result that we're looking for. And I think that at this point in time, there's a calling collectively and individually for this shift in mindset, and like letting the old paradigm essentially die and birthing something new, because otherwise we're just playing whack-a-mole. I think about it this way. I was reading a book recently called Unconditional Parenting. In it, he's talking about on one end of the spectrum of conditional parenting is essentially control and like dominance and saying, no, you can't do this, and no, you can't do this, and um, bringing in an authoritarian kind of approach. So that's one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum is not only to not do that, but it's praise, and it's constant praise and letting a child know how good they are at this. And it's praise through the lens of I love you and you're worthy because you did something. And he talks about those bumper stickers, and I've always had a hard time with these stickers, seeing people drive around with like, proud parent of a sixth grader middle schooler who's a straight A student or something like that, you know and those have always stood out to me because I've always been very sensitive to conditional aspects of love being offered, and that has always felt that way. It's not about just going into a system, seeing where it's broken and trying to fix it. It's also saying like, well, maybe the system just never worked and it doesn't work and it needs to just be kind of gone and thrown out. And maybe there's some things that can stay around, but perhaps not. Maybe it's a full scrap, because we really need to come up with something new and different. And so unconditional parenting, unconditional love in our society is the most radical thing here. I really feel like when it comes into trauma, when it comes into addiction and substance use and like our economy and everything is predicated on conditional forms of parenting, because we were all once children. And that's what most people are healing in my practice, is the various forms of conditional parenting, not just acute instances of abuse, not just this very singular moment of neglect, but like chronic neglect, chronic forms of not really seeing and witnessing that child and loving them unconditionally. So it all ties in. I think that's what's really coming through here, is this needs to be like founded on unconditional love. How can we tap into that energy? How can we feel unconditional love when all we've known is conditionality? How can we be in that place of self energy when we've always been identified as a part?
Yeah, how can we? Yeah, that's really brilliant. How do we identify? How do we bring out access our own core selves when we've always just been a part of someone else's life, or only certain parts of us have been allowed to surface or gain approval? Yeah, yeah, that does become the inner project, is uh unblending from all of the parts, all of the little children, and becoming the individual, the adult. Yeah, I'm really loving this idea. Which again, I mean, I'm very much in agreement here. unconditional love being a really, really powerful thing. And I'm also kind of like a wordsmith nerd here, thinking like, what is love? What is love after all? So I, I, I don't hear you saying it's unconditional. Like, what's the word? It's not just saying, oh, anything goes. I approve of everything you do.
No,
Don't think you're saying that. And
no.
I don't think you're saying either. It's this sort of like fuzzy woo woo feeling. um I think the more I've delved into like the IFS world, the more I'm understanding love to be a gesture of presence. Like when you talk about
Mhm.
I unconditionally love my child, it's a sense of I want to be with you no matter what part of you is up. uh I might have to be a little corrective here and there, but the
Mhm.
relationship is never at stake. You are always welcome. You and your core and your parts are always welcome, even if we have to like do some teaching. And I wonder if that is kind of what you're talking around, or the challenge we run into is this either explicit or implicit sense we grew up with of like, is the relationship okay? Is dad still gonna like me? Is mom still gonna love me? Am I safe?
Mhm.
Is my family gonna be around for me?
Mhm.
Oh no, what's your thought there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like, what is love? Whew, that's a big one. Big
Someone should write
one.
a song about that or something.
I can't imagine anyone would do that, but I would listen to it. Yeah, I don't even know if I can answer that question, but it's definitely a good one to pose. I think that we can ponder here, that love and unconditionality and parenting, and yeah, it's like that presence that you're talking about. It's staying with it, like staying here, like being deeply rooted in presence. I like how Peter Levine from Somatic Experiencing defines trauma as a few things, but one of his definitions is the inability to be present. That trauma, in a sense, will take us out of the present moment, because the present moment is a feeling state. It's not a thinking state necessarily. And the mind will wander, right? It goes into the past, it goes into the future, it thinks about different concepts and has different thought forms. But if we really settle into the present moment, we tend to do that through the senses and through the breath and through feeling the body, because the body lives in the present moment. And so we can't be in the present moment if we're holding so much pain inside of our bodies. And that's where we hold those traumas. Body keeps the score. We hold it in our hearts. We hold it in our guts and throughout our whole nervous system. So, how can we be in presence if we're bringing that in as a synonym for, or a form of love, a way in which love presents itself?
Thank you again for listening to this episode of The Outer Circle Inner Stillness. To complete the conversation and participate in what we have to say around psychedelics and use of psychedelics in a healing process, please visit patreon.com/outer circle and consider becoming a patron. The rest of this episode is now found under our exclusive content for members only, and we'd love to have you be part of the discussion, be part of the community. So you can find us there. Links and everything will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll hopefully see you next time. If a listener wanted to reach out to you in some fashion, where do you exist on the web and in the world, and how can they find you?
So my website is portlandpsychedeliccoach.com. And then they can find me on Instagram. It's entheo.genesis. I'm pretty sure that's my handle. Don't have to look at it too often. But yeah, entheo.genesis on Instagram. And my email is hart@portlandpsychedeliccoach.com. So people are welcome to reach out and, inquire about what it's like to prepare for a journey or integrate, how to utilize the tools that I can offer, the kind of therapeutic tools with IFS, and I offer a variety of other things. So if anyone's curious, they're more than welcome to reach out. We'd love to touch base.
Thank you again for sharing some time and some story, and we'll have to do it again because there's a lot of fun ideas here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Moses. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Hart. I'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye.